They laughed when a 70-year-old man bought a collapsing cabin for just $5, but what his dog uncovered beneath it made powerful people come back in the dark. At 70, Harold Bennett lost everything in a single night: his home, his family, and the last place he thought he belonged. With only $52 left and a loyal German shepherd named Shadow by his side, he made a desperate decision no one could understand. He bought a broken cabin deep in the Montana wilderness, a place no one wanted. But that night, something beneath the floor changed everything, and it would pull danger, secrets, and the past back to his door. Before we begin, tell me in the comments, where are you watching this from? The wind cut through the quiet Montana street like a blade, carrying the dry bite of early winter, when it rattled the bare branches overhead and pushed loose leaves across the cracked pavement, swirling them around the boots of a man who hadn't moved in several minutes. Harold Bennett stood on the front lawn of the house he had lived in for 40 years. The door behind him had just closed, not slammed, not gently shut, just closed. Final, like a sentence already decided. At 70 years old, Harold found himself staring at that door as if it might open again if he waited long enough. His breath came out in thin white clouds, slow and uneven, the rhythm broken not by the cold, but by something deeper, something that had been living inside him since the desert. Shadow pressed against his leg. The German shepherd's thick coat moved slightly in the wind, his amber eyes locked not on the house, but on Harold. Watching. Waiting. Almost as if he understood something had just happened that couldn't be undone. Harold didn't move. Not when the curtains shifted slightly inside the window. Not when he heard the faint click of the deadbolt turning. Not even when his son's voice echoed again in his head, sharper now than when it had been spoken. "You're not a father anymore. You're a problem." The words hit harder now than they had inside. Inside, Harold had stood straight, shoulders squared, back rigid like he was still in uniform. He had learned long ago how to stand still when something inside him was breaking. Out here, with nothing between him and the cold sky, the weight of it began to settle. A problem. The same son he had carried on his shoulders. The same boy who used to run to the door when he came home shouting, "Dad's back!" Harold swallowed hard, and his fingers twitched slightly, the same way they had back in Iraq when the air went too quiet, when something wasn't right, when the silence meant something was coming. The silence now felt the same. Too still. Too final. Shadow let out a low, almost inaudible whine. Harold exhaled slowly and finally looked down. "It's all right, boy," he muttered, though his voice didn't sound like it believed that. Shadow didn't move away. If anything, he pressed closer. The driveway was empty except for Harold's old pickup truck. Rust had started to creep along the edges of the wheel wells, and the windshield held a long crack that stretched like a scar across the glass. It wasn't much, but it ran. Most days. That was all Harold had left. That and the dog. Behind him, inside the house, he could hear faint movement, footsteps, maybe voices, but none of it came toward the door. No one opened it again. No one called his name. No one came out. Harold bent slowly and picked up the small duffel bag sitting by his feet. It wasn't heavy. It couldn't be. There wasn't much left to pack. A few clothes, a worn photograph, some papers. Everything else, the furniture, the tools, the life he had built over decades, was still inside. He didn't take any of it. He wasn't allowed to. The conversation had been quick, too quick for something that was supposed to mean the end of a life. "It's not safe for you here anymore. You can't keep waking the whole house up at night. The neighbors have started asking questions. You need help." The words had sounded reasonable, almost kind, until they weren't. "Oh, we found a place for you. A facility. They'll take care of you." Harold had looked at the brochure his daughter-in-law slid across the table. Clean hallways, smiling staff, a single room that looked more like a waiting area than a home. "How much?" he had asked quietly. $3,000 a month, his son had said. Harold had done the math in his head. His pension, his savings. It didn't add up. "Then how do I pay for it?" A pause. A glance between them. "We'll sell the house." Harold had felt something inside his chest shift. Not break, not yet. Just shift. "This house is mine," he said. His son didn't hesitate. "Not anymore. You signed it over last year, remember?" Harold remembered. A dinner. A conversation about simplifying things. Making sure there wouldn't be legal trouble if something happened to him. He had trusted them, and that trust sat now like a stone in his stomach. "And if I don't go?" Harold had asked. The answer had come fast. Clean, clinical. "Then we'll have you removed." Removed. Like something broken, something unwanted, like a problem. A gust of wind snapped Harold back to the present. He tightened his grip on the duffel bag. Shadow shifted, ears twitching as a car passed slowly down the street. The driver glanced over but didn't stop. Didn't ask. Didn't care. Harold took one last look at the house. The porch where he had sat every summer evening. The window where his wife used to stand, waving when he pulled into the driveway. She had been gone 3 years now. If she had been here... No. Harold closed his eyes briefly. There was no point in thinking about that. When he opened them again, something had changed. Not outside. Inside. But the hesitation was gone. The waiting. He wasn't going to stand here anymore. He turned. The gravel crunched under his boots as he walked toward the truck. Each step felt heavier than it should have, like he was carrying something invisible that refused to be set down. Shadow moved with him, step for step. Harold opened the passenger door first. Up. Shadow jumped in without hesitation, settling into the seat like he had done 1,000 times before. He didn't look back at the house. Harold did. Just once. Then he shut the door. The driver's side creaked as he pulled it open. The seat was cold. The steering wheel colder. He sat there for a moment, hands resting on the wheel, staring straight ahead. For a second, just a second, the world blurred. Not from tears, from something else. The wind outside shifted tone, a distant sound, a hollow echo that twisted into something sharper in his mind. Not wind. Mortar fire. Harold's grip tightened instantly. His breathing changed, faster, shorter. The street in front of him flickered, Montana fading into something else. Sand. Heat. Smoke. His chest tightened. "Harold!" The voice cut through it. Not human. A sharp bark. Shadow. Harold blinked hard. The street snapped back into place. The cold. The truck. The empty road. He sucked in a long breath and forced his hands to loosen on the wheel. "Yeah," he muttered, more to himself than the dog. "I'm here." Shadow watched him, unmoving, until Harold's breathing slowed. Only then did he relax. Harold turned the key. The engine coughed once, then again, before finally coming to life with a rough, uneven growl. He didn't look back again. The truck pulled away from the curb slowly, its tires crunching over gravel, carrying him away from the only home he had ever known. In the rearview mirror, the house grew smaller, then smaller still, until it was gone. Harold kept driving. He didn't know where he was going. He didn't know what came next. All he knew was that everything he had built was behind him now, and the only thing that hadn't left was sitting beside him. Shadow shifted slightly, pressing his head against Harold's arm. Harold glanced at him for a moment, then back at the road. "Guess it's just us now," he said quietly. The dog didn't answer. He didn't have to. The road stretched ahead, long and empty, disappearing into the pale gray horizon. And for the first time in his life, Harold Bennett had nowhere to go but forward. The road stretched endlessly ahead, as a thin gray line cutting through the vast Montana wilderness. The sky hung low and pale, as if winter itself was watching him leave everything behind. The heater in the truck barely worked, coughing out weak bursts of lukewarm air that did little to fight the cold creeping in through the cracked windows. Harold drove in silence. No radio, no destination, just the steady hum of the engine and the quiet presence of Shadow beside him. Every few miles, a farmhouse appeared in the distance, isolated, smoke curling from chimneys, lights glowing warm against the growing dusk. Each one looked like a place someone belonged. Harold didn't belong anywhere anymore. His hands rested stiffly on the wheel. The knuckles were pale, the veins raised. Every so often, his fingers tightened without warning, as if bracing for impact that never came. But a sudden gust of wind hit the truck. The sound, it wasn't loud, not really, but it twisted in his mind. For a split second, the world shifted, metal rattling, a distant explosion, voices shouting. Harold's foot jerked on the brake. The truck skidded slightly before he caught it, pulling it back into line. Shadow barked sharply. Once. That was enough. Harold blinked hard, his breath uneven. "Easy, easy," he muttered, more to himself than the dog. Shadow leaned into him, pressing his body against Harold's leg, grounding him in something real, something present. The road returned. The cold returned. The silence returned. Harold exhaled slowly, steadying himself. "I'm all right," he said under his breath. But even he didn't sound convinced. The sun dipped lower, dragging the temperature down with it, and shadows stretched long across the land, and the empty road began to feel less like a path and more like a question. "Where are you going?" Harold didn't have an answer. Eventually, the fuel gauge pulled his attention. Low, not empty yet, but close enough to matter. He scanned the road ahead. Nothing. Then, finally, a sign appeared, faded, leaning slightly to one side. Gas, groceries, hot coffee, 3 miles. Harold turned the wheel. The road narrowed into a smaller, rougher stretch of asphalt. Snow lingered in patches along the edges, untouched and hardening with the falling temperature. The store came into view slowly. A small, weathered building with a flickering light above the entrance. 2 trucks sat parked outside, both older than Harold's. He pulled in. The engine idled for a moment before he shut it off. Silence. A real silence this time. Harold sat there, staring through the windshield. For a second, he didn't move. Then Shadow shifted. That was enough. Harold opened the door and stepped out. The cold hit him instantly, sharper now that the sun had dipped behind the hills. Inside, the store smelled like old wood, coffee, and something faintly sweet. Maybe pie. A bell above the door chimed as he entered. A woman behind the counter looked up briefly. Mid-50s. Tired eyes, but not unkind. "Evenin'," she said. Harold gave a small nod. "Evenin'." Shadow stayed close, his body brushing Harold's leg as they moved through the narrow aisles. The shelves were sparsely stocked. Canned goods, bread, a few essentials. Nothing fancy, nothing unnecessary. Harold picked up a small pack of crackers, a bottle of water, then paused, and his hand hovered over a bag of dog food. He checked his pocket, pulled out the money, crumpled bills, some coins. He counted. $52. That was all. $52 between him and whatever came next. Harold looked at the bag of dog food again, then at Shadow. The dog stood still, watching him, not begging, not whining, just there, waiting, trusting. Harold picked up the bag. At the counter, the woman rang it up without much comment. "That all?" she asked. "That's all." She glanced at Shadow. "Good dog," she said. Shadow's ears flicked slightly, but he didn't move. "15.80, she added. Harold handed over the money. As she counted it, her eyes lingered on the worn edges of the bills. On the way, Harold held himself, on the silence that seemed to follow him. "You passing through?" she asked casually. Harold hesitated. "Something like that." She nodded like she understood more than he said. "Well, roads get rough up north this time of year," she said. "Not many places open once you get past the ridge." Harold gave a small nod. "I'll keep that in mind." He picked up the bag and turned to leave. That's when Shadow stopped, completely. His body stiffened. His ears went forward. Harold noticed immediately. "What is it?" he murmured. Shadow pulled slightly, just enough to shift Harold's attention toward the far wall. A bulletin board. Old papers pinned in uneven rows. Lost pets. Handwritten notices. Community events. Nothing unusual. But Shadow was focused. Locked in. Harold walked closer. At first he didn't see anything. Then his eyes caught it. A small, torn flyer, barely hanging onto the board by a single tack. County auction. Foreclosed and condemned properties. Minimum bid, $1 cash. Only today, 2 p.m. County office building, Harold stared at it. Today. He checked the time on the old clock above the counter. 1:10 p.m. Less than an hour. He read it again. Condemned properties. Minimum bid. $1. Harold felt something shift inside him. Not hope. Not yet. Something smaller. A thought. If I'm going to be homeless anyway. Shadow let out a soft, low sound. Not a bark. More like an answer. Harold looked down at him, then back at the paper. $52. That was everything he had. Everything. He could stretch it. Buy food. Find a cheap motel for a night or two. Then what? The same road. The same question. "Where are you going?" Harold reached up, but pulled the paper off the board, folded it once, slipped it into his pocket. The woman behind the counter watched him quietly. "You heading to the county office?" she asked. Harold paused, then nodded once. "Yeah." She studied him for a moment, then gave a small, almost knowing nod. "Road straight back the way you came. Can't miss it." Harold didn't say anything else. He stepped outside. The cold felt sharper now, or maybe it was just clearer. He loaded the supplies into the truck, opened the passenger door. "Up." Shadow jumped in, same as always. Harold got behind the wheel. He sat there for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel. The folded paper pressed lightly against his chest inside his jacket. $52. No home. No plan. He turned the key. The engine rumbled to life. Yet Harold looked straight ahead. For the first time since leaving the house, he had somewhere to go. It wasn't much. It wasn't safe. It probably wasn't even smart. But it was something. He shifted the truck into gear. The tires crunched over gravel as he pulled back onto the road. Shadow settled into the seat beside him, calm again. Watching. Waiting. The road stretched ahead. And this time, Harold didn't feel like he was running from something. He was driving toward it. The county building came into view just before the clock struck 2. It wasn't much to look at. Just a low brick structure sitting at the edge of town, with a faded American flag hanging stiff in the cold wind. The parking lot was half full, mostly older sedans and a few newer trucks that looked out of place. Harold pulled in slowly, but the engine idled for a moment before he shut it off. He sat there, hands still on the wheel, feeling that familiar tension build in his chest. Not fear exactly. Something sharper, like stepping into unknown territory. Shadow shifted beside him, alert but calm. "You ready?" Harold muttered. The dog didn't move, but his eyes stayed locked forward, steady as ever. Harold nodded once, more to himself than to Shadow, and opened the door. The cold hit harder here, sharper, as if the wind had picked up just to greet him. He grabbed his jacket tighter and stepped out, Shadow following without a sound. Inside, the building smelled like old paper and stale coffee. A hallway led down to a basement conference room, and as Harold approached, he could already hear voices, laughter, loud and careless. He paused just outside the doorway, but then stepped in. The room was full. Not packed, but crowded enough to feel like a place where decisions were made quickly and without sentiment. About 30 people sat or stood around folding tables, most of them dressed in clean jackets and polished boots. Real estate types, investors, people who knew exactly what they were doing. The moment Harold walked in, the energy shifted, just slightly. Heads turned, eyes lingered. A 70-year-old man with worn clothes and a German shepherd at his side didn't belong in a room like this. Harold felt it immediately. That quiet judgment, that silent question. What is he doing here? He ignored it, moved to the back of the room, took a seat. Shadow settled beside him, calm but alert, watching everything. At the front, a heavy-set man in his 50s adjusted a stack of papers, but his voice carried easily across the room, practiced and quick. "All right, folks, let's get started. 23 properties today, all sold as is. No guarantees, no inspections. You buy it, you own it." The room responded with a low murmur of agreement. Harold leaned back slightly in his chair, watched, listened. The first few properties went fast. Numbers climbed quickly. 10,000, 20, 30. People raised hands without hesitation, voices steady, confident. This wasn't chance for them. This was business. Harold said nothing. He kept his hands still, counted the money in his head. $52. That was everything. Every time a property sold, the numbers reminded him just how far out of place he was. Until the room began to thin. Not physically, but in energy. The excitement dropped, the laughter faded into boredom. The good deals had already been taken. The rest were leftovers. The auctioneer flipped to the next page. "Property 22, he said, his tone already carrying a hint of sarcasm. "Located off Timber Ridge Road, about 12 miles out." A few people chuckled quietly. Harold's attention sharpened. Single structure, built late 1800s, no utilities, no road maintenance, significant structural damage, condemned by county inspection. More laughter now. "Roofs partially collapsed, windows gone, foundations questionable. Oh, and I believe there's wildlife currently occupying the premises." That got a louder reaction. Someone in the room muttered, "Sounds cozy." A few others laughed. Harold didn't. He was listening. Every word. "Minimum bid, $1, the auctioneer continued, barely hiding his lack of interest. "Anyone want to start?" Silence. No hands. No movement. The room had already decided. Not worth it. The auctioneer sighed lightly. "Come on, folks. $1. It's a bargain." More silence. Someone near the front shook his head. Wouldn't take it if you paid me? Laughter. The sound filled the room, loose and careless. Harold felt something shift inside him again. That same quiet thought from before, but louder now. If I'm going to lose everything anyway. His hand moved before he could second-guess it. 5. The word wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a crack. Silence followed. Instant. Every head turned. The auctioneer squinted toward the back. I'm sorry. Did someone say $5? Harold stood. His posture straightened instinctively, the old training settling into his bones. I did. The room went still for about 3 seconds. Then the laughter hit. Not polite, not restrained. Real laughter. People leaned back in their chairs, shaking their heads, exchanging looks. One man near the front actually smiled wide. You serious, old man? Another voice added, You planning to live with the raccoons? More laughter. Harold didn't react, didn't flinch, didn't look away. He had heard worse. Much worse. The auctioneer raised a hand, trying to calm the room. All right. Let's keep it respectful. He looked at Harold more closely now. Sir, I need to make sure you understand what you're bidding on. This property is condemned. It's not livable. No utilities, no access in winter. I understand. Harold's voice was calm, flat, certain. The kind of voice that didn't ask for permission. The auctioneer hesitated, then nodded slowly. All right. $5 has been bid. Do I have 6? Silence. A few people chuckled again, but no one raised a hand. Why would they? The place was worthless. Going once, the auctioneer said. Harold didn't move, didn't blink. Going twice. A pause. The room held its breath, not because anyone cared about the property, but because they were watching something they didn't understand. Sold. The gavel came down with a sharp crack. $5 to the gentleman in the back. The laughter returned. Lighter now, fading as quickly as it had come. For them, it was a joke. For Harold, it was something else. He walked to the front of the room without hesitation, pulled out the money, counted $5, and placed it on the table. The auctioneer looked at him again, this time with something closer to concern. You sure about this? Harold met his eyes. I am. The paperwork was simple. Name, signature, transfer. The pen felt heavier than it should have. When he finished, the auctioneer slid a folded map across the table. Timber Ridge Road, he said. You'll need this. Harold took it, folded it once, slipped it into his jacket. Behind him, the room had already moved on. Another property, another deal. The moment was over. But Harold stayed where he was for a second longer. The paper in his hand felt real, solid, proof. For $5, he owned something again. As he turned to leave, one of the men from earlier stepped closer. Younger, clean jacket, expensive watch. Look, the man said, lowering his voice slightly. I don't know your situation, but that place, it's not safe. You're not going to make it out there. Harold studied him for a moment. Not angry, not defensive. Just steady. I've been in worse places, he said quietly. The man didn't laugh this time. He just nodded once. Good luck. Harold didn't answer. He walked out of the room, shadow at his side. The hallway felt quieter now. The cold outside sharper. But something had changed. Not the world, not the road. Him. He reached his truck, opened the door. Shadow jumped in. Harold climbed behind the wheel, pulling the map from his jacket. He unfolded it slowly. Timber Ridge Road. 12 miles out. No maintenance, no guarantees. He stared at it for a long moment. then folded it again, set it on the dashboard. And his hand rested on the steering wheel. For a brief second, the old fear tried to creep back in. The uncertainty, the question. What if this is a mistake? Harold exhaled slowly, then shook his head. No. He had made worse decisions in war with less to go on. This wasn't fear. This was just the unknown. He turned the key. The engine came alive. Harold glanced at Shadow. The dog was already watching him. Calm. Ready. You heard them, Harold said quietly. We won't last a night. Shadow didn't move. Didn't doubt. Harold nodded once. Let's prove them wrong. The truck rolled forward, out of the parking lot, back onto the empty road, toward something broken, toward something no one else wanted, toward the only thing in the world that was his. The road narrowed the farther they drove. What had once been pavement turned into cracked asphalt, then gravel, and finally a rough dirt path barely wide enough for the truck. Snow clung stubbornly to the ground in patches, untouched by tire tracks, as if no one had come this way in a very long time. Harold leaned forward slightly, eyes fixed on the path ahead. The light was fading. Fast. Montana winters didn't wait for anyone. Gotta make it before dark, he murmured. Shadow sat upright, alert, his gaze constantly shifting between the road and the woods, pressing in on both sides. The trees grew denser the deeper they went, tall, silent, their branches bare and reaching like frozen hands. The world felt quieter out here, too quiet. Harold followed the map from memory now, trusting the turns he had memorized just minutes ago. A left past a fallen fence post, was a right where the road split around a cluster of boulders. Then finally, there it was, the cabin, or what was left of it. Harold slowed the truck to a crawl. The structure stood crooked, leaning slightly to one side as if it had been trying to collapse for years, but never quite finished the job. Half the roof had caved in. Wooden boards were missing from the walls. The front door hung open, creaking softly as the wind pushed against it. No lights, no signs of life, just decay. Harold stopped the truck a few yards away and turned off the engine. Silence settled in instantly, the kind of silence that felt heavy. He didn't move right away, just stared. This is it. $5. Shadow let out a low breath beside him. Not fear, not warning, just acknowledgement. Harold nodded slowly. Yeah, he said under his breath. This is home. The word felt strange, unfamiliar, but he stepped out anyway. The cold hit harder here than anywhere else he'd been that day. It cut through his jacket like it wasn't even there. The wind carried the scent of damp wood and earth and something older, something forgotten. Shadow jumped down beside him, immediately scanning the area. Every movement was measured, every sound registered. Harold grabbed the small bag of supplies from the back of the truck and walked toward the cabin. Each step crunched against frozen ground. Closer. Closer. The front door creaked as he pushed it open fully. Inside was worse than outside. The air was colder somehow, trapped and stale. The floorboards groaned under his weight, some sagging dangerously. Broken furniture lay scattered, covered in dust and debris. The ceiling above had a jagged opening where the sky stared down through splintered beams. Snow had drifted inside in places. This wasn't shelter. Not yet. Harold stepped further in. Shadow followed close, his body brushing against Harold's leg. Steady. Present. Grounded. Harold set the supplies down on what remained of an old table. He looked around slowly, taking it all in. Assessing. Always assessing. His eyes moved from wall to wall, from ceiling to floor, cataloging damage, weaknesses, possibilities. Years of training kicked in without him asking. Find shelter. Secure perimeter. Stay warm. Stay alive. "This'll do," he muttered. Even he didn't sound convinced. Outside, the light faded another degree. Time was running out. Harold moved quickly now. He gathered what wood he could find. Broken pieces of furniture, loose boards, anything dry enough to burn. His hands worked methodically, despite the stiffness creeping in from the cold. Shadow stayed close, occasionally stepping outside and circling the cabin, then returning, checking, protecting. Harold found an old fireplace along the far wall, cracked, but still intact enough to use. He knelt down, arranged the wood, struck a match. For a second, nothing happened. Then, flame. Small at first, then growing. The fire caught slowly, feeding on the dry wood, pushing back against the cold that had taken over the room. Harold sat back on his heels, watched it, listened to the soft crackle. For the first time since arriving, there was warmth. Not much, but enough. Shadow lay down beside the fire, his body finally relaxing slightly. Harold leaned against the wall, pulling his jacket tighter around him. His breath slowed. His muscles loosened. Just a little. This could work. It wasn't much. But it was something. The firelight flickered across the broken walls, casting shadows that moved and shifted with every crack of wood. Outside, the wind picked up. The door rattled. A loose board somewhere creaked sharply. Harold's eyes snapped open. The sound. It hit him wrong. Not as wind, not as wood. Something else. His breathing changed. Faster, shallower. Another gust. Another creak. In his mind, it wasn't a cabin anymore. It was somewhere else. Somewhere hotter. Louder. Metal. Dust. The distant echo of explosions. Voices shouting commands he hadn't heard in years, but somehow never forgot. Harold's hands clenched, his body tensed. And he was no longer sitting by a fire in Montana. He was back there. In it. "Get down!" The words left his mouth before he could stop them. His heart pounded. The fire cracked louder. The wind howled through the broken roof. Everything overlapped. Everything blurred. Shadow moved instantly. No hesitation. He got up and pressed himself against Harold's chest, his weight firm, grounding. His warmth cut through the cold panic flooding Harold's body. Harold's hands grabbed onto the dog's fur without thinking. Real. Solid. Here. Shadow let out a low, steady sound. Not a bark, not a growl. A presence. A reminder. You're not there anymore. Harold blinked hard. Once. Twice. The sounds shifted. The fire returned. The wind became wind again. The cabin came back into focus. His breathing slowed, uneven at first, and then steadier. He exhaled sharply. "I'm here," he whispered. Shadow didn't move, didn't need to. Harold rested his forehead briefly against the dog's head. "Good boy," he said quietly. The fire burned a little stronger now. The shadows settled. The world steadied. But the exhaustion hit him all at once. Not just physical. Everything. The day. The loss. The weight of it all. Harold leaned back against the wall, pulling Shadow closer. The dog stayed pressed against him, sharing warmth. Outside, the night had fully taken over. The temperature dropped further. The wind howled through the broken structure. But inside, there was fire. There was breath. There was something holding the darkness back. Harold's eyes grew heavy, not fully asleep, not fully awake. That space in between, where memories lingered. Up but didn't take over. His hand rested on Shadow's back. Steady. Reassuring. For both of them. "I've been in worse places," he murmured softly. This time, it felt true. The cabin groaned under the pressure of the wind. The fire flickered, and in the middle of nowhere, in a place no one wanted, two broken souls survived their first night. Morning didn't arrive gently. It came in cold. Harold woke before the light fully broke through the shattered roof, his breath visible in the air, his joints stiff from the hard floor. The fire had died down to embers, barely glowing, barely holding on. For a moment, he didn't move. He just listened. The wind had calmed. The forest was quiet. Too quiet. Then, a small movement beside him. Shadow still there, still breathing, still watching. Harold exhaled slowly, and the tension in his chest easing just enough to let him sit up. "You made it," he muttered, his voice rough. Shadow's tail moved once against the floor. That was enough. Harold pushed himself to his feet, every joint protesting. The cold had settled deep into his bones overnight, but it wasn't new. He had felt worse. Much worse. He stepped outside. The air hit him sharp and clean, carrying the scent of pine and frozen earth. The sky stretched wide above him, pale blue, untouched, endless. For a second, it was almost peaceful. Almost. Then a branch snapped somewhere in the distance. Harold froze. His body reacted before his mind caught up. Every muscle tightened. Every sense sharpened. His breathing shifted. Shallow. Controlled. Listening. The forest remained still. Nothing moved. Nothing followed. But the feeling stayed. That edge. That readiness. Shadow stepped beside him, calm but alert, scanning the same tree line Harold was locked onto. Minutes passed before Harold forced himself to move again. "It's nothing," he said under his breath, but his eyes kept searching. Back inside, the cold felt heavier now that the fire was gone. Harold moved quickly. Routine. That's what kept things from slipping. He gathered more wood, checked the structure again, mapped out what could be reinforced, what had to be avoided. His hands worked automatically, even as his mind drifted elsewhere. Back. Always back. A loud crack echoed from the forest. Not close, but not far either. Harold's grip tightened on the piece of wood he was holding. The sound twisted as it reached him. For a second, it wasn't a branch, but it was something else. Something louder. Something violent. He dropped the wood. "Down!" he barked instinctively. Shadow lowered immediately, eyes fixed on Harold. But there was nothing else. No follow-up. No threat. Just silence. Harold stood there, chest rising and falling harder now. He looked around. The cabin. The trees. The cold. Montana. Not Iraq. Not anymore. He dragged a hand down his face. "Damn it," he whispered. Shadow stood up slowly, approaching him with careful steps, as if he understood that something fragile had just cracked. Harold knelt down, rested his hand on the dog's neck. "I'm all right," he said again. But this time, he didn't believe it. The rest of the day passed in fragments. Work, stop, listen, work again. Harold patched a section of the wall using loose boards, and reinforcing it just enough to block the wind. He cleared a corner of the cabin, creating a space that felt slightly less exposed. Each task gave him something to hold on to, something real. But it never lasted long. Every unexpected sound pulled him back. A bird taking off suddenly, the wind shifting direction, even the creak of the cabin settling under its own weight. Each one a reminder. Each one a trigger. By afternoon, exhaustion began to creep in, not just from the physical work, but from the constant tension, the constant fight inside his own head. Shadow stayed close the entire time, never wandering far, never losing sight of him. At one point, Harold sat down against the wall, breathing heavier than he should have been. Shadow approached, nudging his hand gently. Harold looked at him. "You ever get tired?" he asked quietly. Shadow tilted his head slightly. Harold let out a faint, tired breath. "Yeah, me too." The sun dipped lower again, dragging the light with it. Another night was coming. Harold gathered what food he had: crackers, water, a small portion for himself, a larger one for Shadow. He didn't think twice about it. Shadow ate quietly. Harold watched him for a moment, before taking a bite himself. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was shared. Outside, the wind began to rise again. The temperature dropped fast. Harold lit the fire once more, feeding it carefully, making sure it would last longer this time. He sat close to it, closer than before. Shadow lay beside him, his body pressed against Harold's leg. Warm, steady, alive. The fire cracked. The shadows danced, and slowly, the memories started to creep back in. Not loud this time, not overwhelming. Just there, lingering at the edges. Harold stared into the fire, his eyes distant. "There was this night," he said quietly. Shadow didn't move, didn't need to. "We thought it was over. Quiet. Too quiet." His voice was steady, but his hands weren't. Then everything just lit up. He stopped. The fire popped loudly. Harold flinched, just slightly, but enough. He shook his head. "No," he said firmly. "Not tonight." Shadow shifted closer. Harold reached down, resting his hand on the dog's back again, grounding himself, holding on to the present. The fire burned steadily. The wind howled outside. But inside, there was a fragile balance. Not peace, not yet, but something close enough to keep going. Yet Harold leaned back against the wall, eyes half closed. His breathing slowed. Shadow stayed pressed against him. A constant. A lifeline. Out here, there were no voices telling him he was a problem. No one looking at him like he was broken beyond repair. Just the cold. The silence. And one loyal companion who never questioned his worth. Harold looked down at Shadow. "You're the only one who stayed," he said softly. Shadow didn't answer. He didn't have to. The fire flickered. The night deepened. And somewhere between the past and the present, Harold held on. Because this time, he wasn't alone in the fight. The third night came colder than the others. The kind of cold that didn't just sit on your skin. It crept inside your bones and stayed there. The fire burned low. Harold had learned to ration the wood, feeding it slowly, carefully, but even that wasn't enough to push back the deep freeze settling over the mountains. Outside, the forest had gone silent again. Too silent. Harold sat near the fire, sharpening a piece of broken wood into something resembling a tool. Not a weapon, not exactly, but something that made him feel less empty-handed. Shadow was awake, not resting, watching. His ears were forward, body tense in a way Harold had come to recognize. Something's out there. Harold noticed immediately. He stopped moving, listened. At first, nothing. Then, a faint crunch in the snow. Distant, slow. Not wind, not falling branches. Something alive. Harold's grip tightened around the piece of wood. His breathing slowed, controlled, measured. the same way it used to, or the same way it always did when something wasn't right. Shadow stood now, silent, focused. Another sound, closer. A low, almost imperceptible growl slipped from Shadow's throat. Not loud, but enough. Harold felt it in his chest. "Stay," he whispered. Shadow didn't move. The door creaked slightly as the wind shifted. Then, a shape passed by the opening. Fast, too fast to fully see, but enough. Harold stood slowly, every movement deliberate, his eyes locked on the doorway, waiting. The sound came again, closer now, circling, testing. Harold's mind didn't panic. It calculated, not human, too quiet, too patient. Predator. "Wolf," he muttered under his breath. Shadow stepped forward slightly, placing himself between Harold and the door. The growl in his chest deepened. The air inside the cabin tightened, as every second stretched longer. The fire cracked softly behind them. Then, a sudden movement at the door, a flash of gray fur, teeth, eyes reflecting the firelight. The wolf lunged forward just enough to test the space, just enough to see what it was dealing with. Shadow reacted instantly, no hesitation. He launched himself forward with a force that didn't match his size. The two collided just outside the doorway. A blur of movement, growls, snow scattering under their weight. Harold froze for half a second, then moved. "Shadow!" He rushed forward, heart pounding, but the fight was already happening. The wolf was larger, lean, hungry. Its movements were sharp, efficient. But Shadow wasn't fighting for territory. He was fighting for something else. For someone. The sound of the struggle tore through the quiet forest. Low snarls, heavy impacts. Then, a sharp yelp. It cut through Harold like a blade. "Shadow!" He reached the doorway just as the wolf pulled back, snapping once more before retreating into the darkness. Gone. Just like that. But it left something behind. Shadow lay in the snow. Still. Harold dropped to his knees instantly. "Hey, hey, hey!" His voice shook now, the control gone. Shadow's chest moved. Barely. But it moved. "Stay with me. Come on." Harold's hands searched quickly, finding the wound. The leg. Blood. Dark against the snow. Too much. Way too much. "No! No, no!" Harold pressed his hand against the wound, trying to slow it, trying to stop it. Shadow let out a weak sound. Not pain. Something softer. Like he was trying to say it was okay. But it wasn't. Not even close. Harold's breathing turned ragged. His mind raced. Distance. Time. Options. There weren't many. There weren't enough. "I'm not losing you," he said, his voice low but breaking. "You hear me? Not you." He moved fast now, pulled off his jacket, wrapped it tight around Shadow's leg, lifted him. The weight hit him hard. Shadow wasn't small, and Harold wasn't young anymore. But he didn't hesitate, didn't stop. He carried him to the truck, each step heavier than the last, each breath sharper in his chest. The cold bit deeper. The snow resisted, but he kept moving. "Stay with me," he repeated over and over. "I've got you. I've got you." He reached the truck, opened the door with one hand, carefully placed Shadow inside. The dog barely moved, barely reacted, and Harold's heart pounded harder, too hard, too fast. He climbed in, turned the key. The engine struggled, then roared to life. "Come on! Come on!" He didn't know exactly where he was going. Only one thing mattered. Help. Somewhere. Anywhere. The truck lurched forward, tires spinning slightly before catching the ground. Harold gripped the wheel tight. The road ahead was barely visible in the dark. The headlights cut through just enough to show the path. Every bump jolted the truck. Every second felt too long. He kept glancing over. Shadow wasn't moving much. His breathing was shallow. Too shallow. "Don't you do this," Harold said, his voice shaking now. "Don't you leave me too." The words hit harder than he expected, because they weren't just about now. They were about everything. Everyone. Not everyone who had already left. The road twisted. The truck slid slightly on a patch of ice. Harold corrected it instantly. Didn't slow down. Couldn't. "Stay with me, buddy. Please." His voice cracked. For the first time since he left that house, he wasn't holding it together. He couldn't. The forest rushed past them, dark, endless, unforgiving. But Harold didn't stop, didn't hesitate, didn't look back. Because for the first time in a long time, he wasn't fighting for himself. He was fighting for the only thing that had ever refused to leave him behind. The road blurred in front of him. Snow, trees, darkness. Everything passed in streaks of gray and black as Harold drove faster than he should have. The truck rattled with every bump, every turn threatening to send it sliding off the narrow path. But he didn't slow down. Couldn't. Shadow lay across the passenger seat, barely moving now. His breathing was shallow, uneven. The makeshift bandage around his leg was soaked through. Too much blood. Way too much. "Stay with me," Harold whispered again, his voice hoarse, cracking under the weight of fear. The dashboard light flickered faintly, casting a weak glow across the cab. Harold's hands gripped the wheel so tight his knuckles turned pale. Think. Where? The town was too far. He wouldn't make it. The thought hit hard, too hard. For a moment, panic surged again, sharp, overwhelming, threatening to take control. Then, a memory. Not from war, from earlier. The woman at the store. Her voice. "Roads get rough up north. Not many places open past the ridge." But that meant something else. Was if people warned about it, someone must be out there. Harold leaned forward, scanning the darkness ahead. "Come on. Come on." The truck rounded a bend, and then a faint light. Far ahead. Small, but real. Harold's breath caught. There. He pressed the gas a little harder. The light grew clearer. A cabin. Not broken like his. Solid. A thin trail of smoke rising from the chimney. Alive. Harold pulled in fast, the tires crunching hard against the frozen ground. He didn't even shut the engine off. He jumped out of the truck, rushing to the passenger side. "Shadow, hey, stay with me." He lifted the dog again, his arms shaking now from exhaustion, from cold, from everything hitting him all at once. The porch steps creaked under his weight. He reached the door, knocked. Hard. No answer. He knocked again. Louder. Hello?" Nothing. For a second, the world held still. Then, footsteps inside. Slow. Measured. The door opened. An older man stood there. Late 60s, maybe early 70s. Gray beard, lined face, eyes sharp despite the years. He wore a heavy flannel shirt and thick gloves, as if he had been working outside not long ago. He looked at Harold, then at Shadow. Everything changed in his expression in an instant. What happened? "Wolf," Harold said quickly. "He's bleeding bad. I don't have time. Get inside." No hesitation, no questions, just action. Harold stepped in immediately. The warmth hit him first, then the smell, wood, leather, something cooking on a stove. The man moved quickly, clearing space on a large wooden table. "Set him here." Harold placed Shadow down carefully. The dog let out a faint sound. Yes, alive. Still alive. The man moved with practiced hands, already pulling supplies from a nearby cabinet. Cloth, bandages, alcohol. "Hold him steady," he said. Harold did, his hands firm but gentle. The man worked quickly, cutting away the soaked fabric around the wound. He didn't flinch, didn't hesitate. "You're lucky," he muttered. "Missed the artery." Harold exhaled sharply, like he'd been holding his breath for hours. "Will he make it?" The man didn't answer right away. He focused, cleaned the wound, wrapped it tight, secured it. Only then did he glance up. "If infection doesn't set in..." "Yeah, he's got a shot." A shot. That was enough. Harold's shoulders dropped slightly, the tension easing just a fraction. Shadow's breathing steadied under his hands. Not strong, but better. But the man finished tying off the bandage, then stepped back. "Keep him warm. No walking for a few days." Harold nodded. "Thank you." The words felt too small, too simple for what had just happened. The man shrugged lightly. "Dog like that doesn't deserve to go out like that." He studied Harold for a moment. Longer this time. "You Army?" he asked. Harold paused, then nodded. "Yeah, I figured." There was no judgment in his voice, no pity, just recognition, the kind that didn't need explaining. The man extended a hand. "Caleb Turner." Harold hesitated for a second, just long enough to feel the unfamiliar weight of the moment, then took it. "Harold Bennett." Caleb nodded once. "Cabin out on Timber Ridge yours?" Harold blinked slightly. "You know it?" Caleb gave a short, quiet chuckle. "Everyone knows it, or what's left of it." Harold glanced down at Shadow. "He's the only reason I'm still there." Caleb followed his gaze. "Yeah," he said softly. "I can see that." Silence settled for a moment. Not uncomfortable, just real. Caleb turned back to the stove, pouring something into a cup. "Coffee?" he asked. Harold nodded. "Yeah." Caleb handed it over. The warmth seeped into Harold's hands instantly. He hadn't realized how cold he was until that moment. He took a slow sip. It tasted strong. Simple. Perfect. "Stay the night," Caleb said, not looking at him. Harold shook his head slightly. "I can't." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "Why not?" Harold glanced toward the door, toward the darkness outside. "That place, it's all I've got." Caleb studied him again. This time, there was something deeper in his expression, but understanding. "You're not wrong," he said quietly. He reached into a drawer, pulling out a small bundle of supplies, extra bandages, a bottle of antiseptic, a few tools. He set them on the table. "You'll need these." Harold looked at them, then at Caleb. "I don't have money." Caleb waved it off. "Didn't ask." Harold hesitated, then nodded once. "Thank you." Caleb leaned back slightly, arms crossed. "You're not crazy, you know." The words caught Harold off guard. "What?" Caleb nodded toward the door. "People out here. They hear things, see things, live through things they don't talk about. Doesn't make them broken." Harold said nothing, but the words landed. Deep. Caleb looked at Shadow again. "You made it this far," he added. "That means something." Harold followed his gaze, while Shadow's chest rose and fell slowly. Steady, alive. Harold reached down, resting his hand gently on the dog's side. "Yeah," he said quietly. "It does." Outside, the wind had calmed. The night didn't feel as heavy anymore, and for the first time since everything fell apart, the world hadn't turned its back on him. Not completely. Not yet. The drive back to the cabin felt different. Slower. Heavier. But steadier. Harold kept both hands on the wheel, eyes fixed on the narrow path ahead. The headlights cut through the dark in a steady beam, guiding them back through the same twisting road. But this time, the silence didn't feel as empty. Shadow lay across the seat, wrapped carefully in Harold's old jacket and Caleb's bandages. His breathing was deeper now, still weak, but no longer fading. Harold glanced over every few seconds. "Still with me," he murmured. Shadow's ear twitched. That was enough. The cabin appeared again out of the darkness. Crooked. Broken. Waiting. Harold pulled up slowly. Turned off the engine. The silence returned. But it wasn't the same silence as before. Now, it felt like something was watching. Or waiting. Harold stepped out, moving carefully this time. He opened the passenger door and lifted Shadow gently, cradling him closer than before. "I've got you," he said quietly. Inside, the cold had settled deep again. The fire was long gone. The air bit at his face as he stepped in. Harold moved quickly, setting Shadow down near the fireplace, then gathering wood with renewed urgency. Within minutes, a small fire flickered to life again, pushing back the cold just enough, and he sat beside Shadow, adjusting the bandage. Careful. Precise. Just like Caleb had shown him. Shadow didn't resist, didn't whine. He just watched Harold with those steady eyes, trusting, always trusting. "You're tougher than me," Harold said under his breath. The fire cracked, the walls creaked, and slowly, the cabin began to feel lived in. Not fixed, not safe, but occupied. Time passed quietly, the kind of quiet that didn't demand anything. Harold leaned back against the wall, exhaustion pulling at him again. But this time, something was different. Shadow moved, slowly, carefully. He tried to stand. "Hey, easy," Harold said, reaching out. But Shadow wasn't restless. He wasn't confused. He was focused. His nose lowered to the ground. He sniffed. Once, twice, then began to move, limping, dragging his injured leg slightly, but still determined. "Shadow." Harold frowned. The dog ignored him. He moved across the cabin, step by step, toward the far corner, the darkest corner. The place Harold hadn't paid much attention to. Just broken boards, dust, nothing useful. "Not now," Harold said softly. "You need to rest." But Shadow didn't stop. He reached the corner, lowered his head again, and began to paw at the floor. Slow at first, then more insistent, scraping, digging. Harold watched him, confused. "What are you doing?" Shadow paused, looked back at him, then returned to digging. There was something in the way he moved, not random, not restless, intentional. Harold pushed himself up, walking over slowly. "All right, let's see what you've got." He knelt beside Shadow, brushing away loose debris. Yet the floorboards there were weaker, more worn. One of them shifted slightly under his hand. Harold frowned. He pressed down. The board creaked, then dipped. Not normal. He grabbed the edge, pulled. At first it resisted. Then it gave. The board lifted slightly, revealing darkness beneath. Harold froze. "What the?" He pulled harder. The board came loose completely. A cold draft rushed up from below, different from the air above. Colder, staler, older. Harold leaned closer, peering into the opening. Nothing at first, just black. Then, a shape, edges, structure. Not earth, not random. Something built. Shadow let out a low sound beside him. Not fear, recognition. Harold's heart slowed, then picked up again. Different this time. Not panic, curiosity. He grabbed a piece of burning wood from the fire, using it as a makeshift torch, held it over the opening. The light spilled downward and revealed a ladder. Old, metal, leading down into something deeper. Harold stared. This wasn't part of the cabin. This wasn't decay. This was hidden, deliberate. "Who put this here?" he whispered. The air from below carried a faint smell. Not rot, not mold. Something else. Metal, dust, time. Shadow shifted again, lowering himself beside the opening, watching, waiting. Harold sat back slowly, his mind turning. This place wasn't just abandoned. It was layered, buried, forgotten. Or maybe hidden on purpose. He looked at Shadow. The dog met his gaze, calm despite the pain in his leg. "You knew something was here," Harold said quietly. Shadow didn't answer, but he didn't look away either. The fire flickered behind them, while the shadows stretched longer. The opening in the floor seemed to breathe in the dim light, calling. Harold stood slowly, walked back to the fire, then returned with another piece of burning wood. More light. More certainty. He crouched again at the edge of the hole. His hand rested on the ladder. Cold, solid, real. He hesitated. Just for a second. Then shook his head. Not tonight. His voice was firm, measured, smart. He wasn't rushing into something unknown in the dark. Not anymore. Not like before. He replaced the board loosely over the opening, not sealing it, just covering it. For now. He turned back to Shadow. "Good job," he said quietly. He reached down, gently scratching behind the dog's ear. Shadow's eyes softened slightly. Harold sat back down near the fire. But his gaze kept drifting to that corner, to the place beneath the floor, the place that shouldn't exist. Outside, the wind picked up again. The cabin creaked. The fire crackled. But none of it mattered as much as that one thought now forming clearly in Harold's mind. This wasn't just a broken house. It was something else. Something hidden. Something waiting. And for the first time since he had been thrown out of his own home, Harold didn't feel like he had nothing. He felt like he had found something. Something no one else had seen. Something no one else had taken. Something that belonged to him. The fire burned low. The night deepened. And beneath the broken floor of a $5 cabin, a buried secret waited to be uncovered. Morning came slow. Not because the sun was late, but because Harold didn't sleep much, and every time he closed his eyes, his mind drifted back to that opening beneath the floor. The ladder, the cold air rising from below, the feeling that something down there didn't belong to the same world as the broken cabin above. He sat by the fire as the first light slipped through the gaps in the roof. Shadow lay beside him, breathing steady, alive. That was what mattered most. Harold checked the bandage again, careful not to disturb the wound. The bleeding had slowed. The wrapping held. "You're not going anywhere," he said quietly. Shadow blinked once. Harold nodded, satisfied. But his eyes drifted again. To the corner. To the board covering the opening. Waiting. He stood slowly. Grabbed a thicker piece of wood from the fire. Stronger light this time, more prepared. He walked over, knelt, His hand rested on the loose board. For a moment, he didn't move. The old instinct kicked in. Assess, think, don't rush. He listened. Nothing. No movement. No sound. Just silence. Harold lifted the board. The opening yawned beneath him, darker than before in the early morning light. The cold air rose again, unchanged, steady, real. He lowered the burning wood slightly. The light spilled downward. The ladder waited. Still. Silent. Harold exhaled slowly. "All right," he muttered. Then he placed one foot on the first rung. The metal creaked faintly under his weight. He paused. Listened again. Nothing. Then he began to descend. One step at a time. Slow. Controlled. The air grew colder the further he went down. Thicker. Still. The light from above faded quickly, but replaced only by the flickering glow in his hand. 10 steps. 15. Then. His boots touched solid ground. Harold stood still for a moment, letting his eyes adjust. The space around him slowly took shape. Concrete. Not dirt. Concrete walls. Reinforced. Old. But strong. This wasn't a root cellar. This wasn't storage. This was built. Purposefully. Harold lifted the light higher. The room stretched wider than he expected. A narrow corridor led deeper into the structure. On one side, metal shelves, rusting but intact. On the other, closed doors, heavy, sealed. His breath slowed. This wasn't random. This was something else. He stepped forward. Each footstep echoed faintly against the concrete. Controlled, measured, like he was walking into something he had done before. Somewhere he had been before. Not this place, but something like it. The air smelled faintly of dust and old machinery. Not decay, preserved, forgotten. Harold reached the first door, ran his hand across it. Cold steel, a faded symbol barely visible through the grime. Military. He knew it immediately, even after all these years. His jaw tightened slightly. "What were you doing out here?" he whispered. He pushed the door. It resisted at first. Then, slowly, it opened. The hinges groaned softly. Inside, another room, smaller but organized. Old desks, filing cabinets, maps pinned to the wall, faded, yellowed, but still visible. Coordinates, lines, markings. Harold stepped in. His eyes moved across everything, reading, understanding, piecing it together. This wasn't just a bunker. This was a command post, a place built to watch, to monitor, to operate from the shadows. He opened one of the cabinets. Inside, files, stacks of them, carefully labeled. Harold pulled one out, blew the dust off, the title barely readable. Operation Cold Ridge. His brow furrowed. He flipped it open. Pages, reports, names, dates, some of them blacked out, some of them intact. His eyes moved faster now, scanning, absorbing. The deeper he read, the heavier the silence became. This wasn't abandoned by accident. This was shut down, hidden, left behind. Harold closed the file slowly. His hand lingered on it. For a moment, the past and present blurred again. Not from fear, from recognition. He had seen things like this before. Places no one talked about. Operations no one admitted existed. He looked around the room again. The maps, the equipment, the files. This wasn't junk. This wasn't worthless. This was history. Buried. Forgotten. Or maybe intentionally erased. A sound above. Faint. But enough. Harold froze. His head snapped upward. The light in his hand flickered slightly. Was it shadow? Or something else? His breathing slowed again. Controlled. Listening. Nothing followed. Just the distant creak of the cabin shifting above. Harold exhaled, but the feeling remained. He wasn't alone. Not down here. Not anymore. Not in the way he had been before. He looked at the file in his hand. Then around the room. Everything here meant something. Everything here had value. Not just money. Meaning. Purpose. For the first time in a long time, Harold felt it again. That sense, that clarity, like he wasn't drifting anymore, but like he had found something worth holding on to. He turned back toward the ladder, careful, focused. He climbed up slowly, each step bringing him back to the cabin, back to the light, back to Shadow. When he pulled himself up through the opening, Shadow was already watching him, eyes alert, waiting. Harold set the wood down, replaced the board loosely again, then sat beside the dog. For a moment, he didn't say anything, just rested his hand gently on Shadow's back. "You found it," he said quietly. Shadow blinked. Harold let out a slow breath. "This place, it's not what they said." He looked around the broken cabin, the cracked walls, the missing roof, the cold creeping in, then back at the floor, at what lay beneath it. "They laughed," he murmured. A faint, almost invisible smile touched his lips. Guess they didn't know what they were looking at. The fire crackled softly. The morning light grew stronger, and somewhere between the ruins above and the secret below, Harold Bennett realized something had changed. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He had found something worth protecting. The change didn't come all at once. It came quietly. Like everything else out there. Harold moved differently the next few days. Not faster, not stronger, but sharper. Every step had purpose now. Every glance meant something. The cabin was no longer just shelter. It was a position, and beneath it, something valuable enough that it had been hidden. That thought stayed with him. Wouldn't leave. He reinforced the floor above the opening, careful not to draw attention to it, just enough to make it look like nothing had changed. Well, just enough to protect it. Shadow remained inside most of the time, healing, resting, but still watching, always watching. By the fourth day, the wound had begun to close, slowly, but it was progress. Harold sat beside him that morning, adjusting the bandage again. "You saved me out there," he said quietly. Shadow's ears shifted slightly. Harold gave a faint nod. "I won't forget that." The wind outside had calmed. Too calm. Harold noticed it right away. Silence like that. It didn't belong. He stood slowly, walked to the doorway, looked out. The trees stood still, the snow untouched. But something felt off. A sound. Distant. Faint. An engine. Harold froze. Listened. There it was again. Low. Growing louder. His jaw tightened. No one came out here. No one had a reason to, unless they did. "Stay," he said to Shadow. The dog didn't argue, but his body tensed immediately. Harold stepped outside. The cold air hit him, but he barely noticed. His eyes scanned the tree line. Then, movement. A vehicle. Dark. Unfamiliar. It pushed through the narrow path, tires crunching over frozen ground, heading straight toward the cabin. Harold didn't move, didn't hide. He stood there, waiting. The truck stopped a short distance away. The engine idled, then shut off. Silence again. The door opened. A man stepped out. Mid-40s, clean jacket, city boots that didn't belong out here. Another man followed, then a third. They weren't lost. They weren't wandering. They came here, on purpose. Harold's eyes narrowed slightly. One of them stepped forward, hands open, smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Bennett, all right?" Harold didn't answer, didn't confirm. The man continued anyway. "We heard about your purchase, that cabin." He glanced at it briefly, then back at Harold. "Interesting choice." Harold said nothing. The man took a few steps closer. Not aggressive, but not casual either. "We'd like to make you an offer." There it was. Harold felt it settle into place. This wasn't random. They knew, or at least, they suspected. "I'm not selling," Harold said flatly. The man smiled slightly. "You haven't heard the offer yet." "Doesn't matter." The smile faded just a fraction. "We're talking good money here. Life-changing money." Harold shook his head once. "I'm good." The second man shifted slightly, glancing toward the cabin, toward the ground, toward something they couldn't see, but clearly believed was there. You sure you know what you bought?" he asked. Harold's gaze sharpened. "More than you think." Silence stretched between them. Cold. Tight. The first man let out a small breath. "Look," he said, his tone changing slightly. "We don't want this to be difficult." Harold didn't move, didn't react. The man nodded slowly. "All right," he said. "Think about it." They turned, walked back to the truck. No threats. No force. Just that quiet certainty. They knew something. The engine started again. The vehicle pulled away, disappeared back down the path. Harold stood there long after the sound was gone, his mind turning. Faster now. They didn't just guess. They came prepared. That meant this place wasn't as forgotten as it looked. He turned back toward the cabin. Shadow was already at the doorway, watching, waiting. Harold stepped inside, closed the door behind him. "They know something," he said quietly. Shadow didn't move, but his eyes stayed locked on Harold. The air inside felt heavier now. Different. The secret below wasn't just his anymore. Not really. Harold walked to the corner, looked down at the floor, the hidden opening, the bunker, everything beneath it. "They're not done," he murmured. And he was right. That night, they came back. No headlights this time. No engine noise. Just movement. Shadows between trees. Harold was already awake, sitting by the fire, waiting. He had learned enough to know when something ends too quietly, it isn't over. Shadow's ears lifted first, then his body tensed. A low growl formed in his chest. Harold stood slowly, but his hand closed around the piece of wood he had sharpened days before. Not much, but enough. A sound at the side of the cabin. Soft, careful, testing. Harold moved toward it. Silent, controlled. Another sound. Closer now. Then, the faint scrape of something against the wall. Someone was trying to get in. Harold's breath slowed, focused, ready. The door handle shifted slightly. Not enough to open. Just enough to check. Harold didn't wait. He stepped forward, opened the door suddenly. The figure outside flinched. Just for a second. But that was enough. Shadow lunged. Despite the injury, despite everything, he moved with everything he had left. The man stumbled back, falling hard into the snow. "Back off!" another voice shouted from the trees. More movement. More figures. Harold stepped out, him standing between them and the cabin. His posture changed completely. Not the man they laughed at. Not the man they pitied. Something else, something older, harder. "You picked the wrong place," Harold said. His voice was calm, cold, the kind of voice that didn't bluff. The men hesitated, just for a second, but that second mattered. Shadow stood beside Harold now, limping, bleeding slightly through the bandage, but still there. Still ready. The silence stretched. Then, one of the men stepped back. "Not worth it," he muttered. The others followed, reluctantly. They retreated into the trees, gone again, but not defeated. Harold didn't move until the last sound faded. Then he turned, looked down at Shadow. The bandage had torn slightly. A small line of fresh blood showed through. Harold knelt immediately. "Hey! Hey!" His hands were steady this time, but his eyes, they weren't. "You shouldn't have done that," he whispered. Shadow looked at him. No regret. No hesitation. Just the same unwavering loyalty. Harold swallowed hard. "You don't quit, do you?" Shadow didn't answer. He never did. Harold rested his forehead briefly against the dog's head. "Neither do I." The fire burned behind them. The night stretched on. But something had changed again. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was defense. This was a line drawn, and anyone who crossed it would find out exactly who they were dealing with. Morning didn't feel the same anymore. The cabin stood where it always had, broken, leaning, half forgotten by the world. But something in the air had shifted. It wasn't just a place now. It was a line, and Harold had drawn it. He stepped outside just after sunrise, the cold biting at his face, the snow crunching beneath his boots. The forest looked unchanged, quiet, still, distant. But Harold knew better now. Someone had been here. Someone would come again. He scanned the tree line slowly, his eyes sharper than they had been in years. Not searching, watching. Shadow stepped out beside him. Slower now. The limp still there. But the fire in his eyes hadn't dimmed. Harold crouched, checking the bandage again. "You're pushing it," he said quietly. Shadow didn't pull away, didn't resist. Harold adjusted the wrap carefully, his hands steady. "You saved me again last night." He paused, swallowed slightly. "I won't forget that either." Shadow's tail moved once against the snow. That was enough. But the sound of an engine broke the silence. Different this time. Not hidden, not sneaking. Open. Harold stood immediately. His body tensed. His mind sharpened. Another truck came into view. This one official. White, marked, county seal on the side. It stopped near the edge of the clearing. The door opened. 2 people stepped out. A woman in her 40s carrying a folder, and an older man behind her, thin, glasses, wearing a heavy coat despite the morning sun. Not like the others, not hunters, not buyers. Something else. The woman approached first. "Mr. Bennett?" Harold didn't answer right away, then gave a small nod. "That's me." She glanced briefly at the cabin, then at him. "I'm Laura Mitchell, County Records Office." She gestured slightly to the man behind her. "This is Dr. Alan Reeves. Historical preservation." Harold's eyes narrowed slightly. "What do you want?" Laura opened the folder. "Word travels fast out here," she said, "especially when people start asking about properties that weren't supposed to matter." Harold said nothing. Dr. Reeves stepped forward slowly, his gaze moving across the cabin with a different kind of focus. Not judgment, not dismissal. Recognition. "You found something," he said quietly. Not a question. A statement. Harold held his ground. "Maybe." Dr. Reeves nodded once as if that confirmed everything he needed. "There were rumors," he continued. "Cold War infrastructure, remote monitoring sites, places built and then forgotten." He glanced at the ground beneath the cabin. Careful, respectful. Most people dismissed it as stories. Harold's voice came low. They were wrong." Silence followed. Heavy. Real. Laura exchanged a look with Dr. Reeves, then turned back to Harold. "If what we believe is under this property is real, then this isn't just private land anymore." Harold's jaw tightened. "Meaning?" "Meaning," she said carefully, "it could be designated as a protected historical site." Harold didn't move, didn't react. But inside, something shifted. Protected. Not taken. Not stolen. Recognized. Dr. Reeves stepped closer, his voice softer now. "You didn't just find a bunker," he said. "You found a piece of history people tried to bury." Harold looked at him. Really looked this time. And for the first time, he saw something he hadn't seen in a long time. Respect. Not for the land, not for the bunker, for him. Laura closed the folder. "We'd like to document it," she said. "Properly, with your permission." Harold's eyes drifted to the cabin, to the ground beneath it, to shadow beside him. Everything he had now. Everything he had fought to keep. "You're not taking it," he said. Laura shook her head. "No." Dr. Reeves added quietly, "You'd remain the steward, the caretaker." Harold let that sit. Steward. Not owner. Not outsider. Something else. Something with meaning. A sound behind them. Another vehicle. Harold turned and saw it immediately. His son. Stepping out of a clean, polished SUV. The same jacket. The same posture. The same look. But something was different now. Not confidence. Something closer to hesitation. "Dad," his son said, walking forward. Harold didn't move. Didn't answer. The air shifted again. A different tension this time. Personal. Sharp. "I heard what happened," his son continued. "About the property." Harold's eyes stayed locked on him. "You heard fast." His son swallowed slightly. "I came as soon as I could." Harold let out a faint breath. "Did you?" Silence stretched. Then, "We can fix this," his son said quickly. "You don't have to stay out here. We can sell this place, split the money, get you somewhere comfortable." There it was. Clear. Simple. The same voice, the same mindset, just dressed differently. Harold stepped forward slowly, not angry, not loud, but steady. "You didn't come for me," he said. His son froze. Harold's voice stayed calm. "You came for this." He gestured toward the cabin, toward the land, toward everything beneath it. His son opened his mouth, then closed it. No denial, no argument, just silence. Harold nodded once. That was answer enough. "You said something to me," Harold continued quietly, "back at the house." His son looked down, then back up. "I didn't mean—" "You did." Harold's voice didn't rise, didn't break, but it carried weight. "You said I wasn't a father anymore." The words hung in the air, cold, unavoidable. Harold took another step closer. "You didn't lose me," he said. A beat. Then, "You abandoned me." Silence. No one moved. Not Laura. Not Dr. Reeves. Not even the wind. His son stood there, the weight of it settling in. Heavy. Real. But Harold didn't wait for an answer. Didn't need one. He stepped back, turned away, walked toward shadow, toward the cabin, toward what was his. Behind him, the world stayed quiet, and because for the first time, Harold Bennett wasn't the man they left behind. He was the man who stayed. The days that followed didn't rush. They settled, like snow after a storm, quiet, steady, certain. The county returned within the week, this time with more equipment, more careful steps, more respect. Nothing was touched without Harold's word. Nothing moved without his approval. The cabin didn't change overnight. It still leaned, still creaked, still carried the scars of time. But something else had been added. Presence. Purpose. People came, but not like before. Not hunters. Not buyers. Historians. Engineers. Quiet voices that spoke in low tones, walking carefully, documenting what lay beneath without disturbing what stood above. Dr. Reeves spent hours below ground, as moving through the bunker with a kind of reverence Harold understood without explanation. "This place," he said one afternoon, emerging into the cold light, "was never meant to be found again." Harold leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "Guess it wasn't buried deep enough." Dr. Reeves gave a faint smile. Or maybe it was waiting for the right person. Harold didn't respond, but the words stayed with him. Shadow lay nearby, his leg healing stronger each day. The limp was still there, but less now. His strength returned quietly, just like everything else. He watched everyone, every movement, every stranger, but he no longer growled, no longer tensed, because Harold didn't, and that was enough. The sign came a few days later, simple, wooden, placed at the edge of the clearing. A historical site, protected property. Steward, Harold Bennett. Harold stood in front of it for a long time, reading it once, then again. Steward, not forgotten, not discarded, not a burden. Something else, something earned. A truck pulled up behind him. He didn't turn right away. He didn't need to. He knew. The footsteps were slower this time. Careful, not confident. His son stopped a few feet behind him. "I didn't come to take anything," he said quietly. Harold said nothing. The wind moved softly through the trees. "I was wrong," his son added. The words didn't come easily. They weren't clean. They weren't practiced. They were heavy and late. Harold turned slowly, looked at him, really looked, not as a father, not as someone expecting something, just as a man. You were, Harold said. Simple, clear. There's no anger, no shouting, just truth. His son nodded once, his eyes dropping briefly. I didn't understand what you were going through. Harold let out a slow breath. No, he said. You didn't. A pause, then. That doesn't change what you did. The words settled between them, firm, unshaken. His son swallowed. I know. Another silence. Different this time. Not sharp, not defensive. Just real. Harold glanced back at the cabin, at the land, at the life he had built from nothing. You don't fix things by showing up when there's something to gain, he said. His son nodded again. I know. Harold studied him for a moment longer, then gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. That's a start. Nothing more. Nothing less. His son didn't argue, didn't push. He just stood there. Then, slowly, he stepped back, and turned, and walked away. Not pushed, not driven out. Just gone. Harold watched him leave, not with anger, not with relief, just acceptance. Some things didn't need to be chased anymore. Some things didn't need to be fixed all at once. He turned back to the sign, to the cabin, to what remained, and what had been rebuilt. The repairs came slowly, board by board, day by day. The roof was patched, the walls reinforced, the wind found fewer ways inside. The fire burned stronger, warmer. The cabin didn't become something new. It became something real. Harold worked with steady hands, not rushed, not pressured, just present. Shadow followed him everywhere again, limp fading, strength returning, always close, always watching, always there. One evening, weeks later, Harold sat on the front steps, while the sun dipped behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the land. The air was still cold, but not biting, not cruel, just honest. Shadow lay beside him, his head resting near Harold's boot. The forest stretched out ahead, quiet, alive, no longer empty. Harold reached down, resting his hand on Shadow's head. The dog didn't move, didn't need to. They sat like that for a long time. No words, no noise, just presence, just peace. After everything, the war, the loss, the betrayal, the cold nights, the fight to survive, the fight to protect, it came down to this: a broken place, a buried past, and a bond that never broke. Harold exhaled slowly. They called us broken, he said softly. Shadow's ear twitched slightly. Harold's hand rested steady against him. Turns out, he looked out at the land, at the cabin, at everything he had almost lost before he ever found it. We were just waiting to be found. The sun disappeared behind the horizon. The firelight flickered through the cabin windows, and in a place no one wanted. A home finally stood. If this story touched you, even just a little, drop a 1 in the comments so I know you made it all the way here. And if you've ever felt lost, forgotten, or like the world turned its back on you, type a 0 because you're not alone. Your comment might be small, but it means more than you think. And if you believe in loyalty, in second chances, in stories that remind us what really matters, make sure you subscribe, because the next story might be the one you needed to hear. I'll see you there.